Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from anthonymorganti.com, and this is part one of our video series on how to modify your photographs using Lightroom. In this series, it's going to be very in-depth. We're going to cover Lightroom from beginning to end, but in this first part, we're just going to jump right into the Develop module because I believe that most people just want to start modifying their photographs. They don't really care about the map or the book or the slideshow or anything like that. Um, Probably the next most important module after the Develop module is the Library module, which is typically where you would think we'd start. But I'm going to assume you know how to get your photographs onto your computer and into Lightroom. And we're going to, as I mentioned, we're going to just develop a photograph today. The future videos, I'll go in depth in the library, map, book, slideshow, print, and web modules. But we're going to spend a lot of time in the develop module, I should say. We're going to have a lot of videos because that's the meat and potatoes of Lightroom. And let's just get started right now. These are the side panels, and I'm not even going to talk too much about these right now. I just want to go right in and start developing a picture, and so you guys see how the basic controls work, and then we'll get into other things in in later videos. So I'm going to close down these panels just to give us a little more room. And what we have over here is this is our toolbar, different tools that are available in Lightroom, cropping tool and spot removal tool, red eye tool, graduated filter, radial filter, and brush. We're not going to do too much of those actually in this video. What we are going to do, I'm going to show you my basic workflow that I use to modify a photograph, and we'll go from there. What we are going to do is the first thing I do when I have a photograph is I like to straighten the horizon, and this is Lightroom 5. This control is also in Lightroom 4, and what I use is the angle control, and you just click here and you can see how it gives you a kind of a level, and you could draw on any vertical, something that should be totally vertical in the picture, or any horizontal, something that should be horizontal. So I'm going to pick the horizon line here, and you could just draw a line like that across the horizon and let go, and it straightened my picture. See, it wasn't very crooked to begin with. Then to accept the changes, you could hit enter. The next thing I do is all these different modules here. You could go in order, you could jump around, it doesn't matter. But I like to do lens corrections next because I like to see what the photograph should look like the way my eyes saw it. So I'm going to correct any distortion my lens caused, or anything that was caused by the camera and lens. Lightroom has profiles built in for your camera, your lens, just about I've never had one that wasn't in there. You can see I shot with a Nikon. I used this specific model of lens, and when you hit this checkbox, enable profile collections, Lightroom will actually compensate the photograph for the problems that the lens might have, any distortion, barrel distortion, anything like that. This panel is slightly different in Lightroom 4, but all these controls are there. The remove chromatic aberration is especially on verticals, you'll get some red, or I should say purple and green kind of fringing around the edge. And this is caused by the lens, and it's more prominent in a real dark area of a picture. This helps remove it when you hit the remove chromatic aberration. In Lightroom 5, you also could just click this auto here, and it will automatically level the picture and bring, sometimes verticals tend to be falling away from you. If you click that, it tends to bring everything back. And that's really all I do with the lens corrections right now. Next, I jump up into the basic module, and in here we could adjust for color balance and exposure, a lot of different things. In this photograph, my color balance is fine, tint's fine. I'm not really worried about any of that, so we're not going to mess with that. Now, typically what I do, and actually most photographers do with a landscape photo, when they come into the basic module, is they bring the shadows all the way up. Now you can see it opened up all this dark area down here. One thing I should mention though, let me return this to 0. By double clicking on a control, you bring it back to where it began. In this photograph, you can see there's some very bright areas, some very dark areas. I exposed for the highlights, it's called. I exposed so it's slightly underexposed. So I have some detail in the sky in the bright area. It's easier in really all photo editing software to bring out the detail in the dark areas. If your light areas become too light, they get blown out and the information there is lost forever. So you'd like to, when you have a scene like this, it's the very bright, very dark, is to tend to expose it so it's underexposed, so it's darker. You could get the details out of this part. So what we're going to do now, as I mentioned, is we go back and we take the highlights all the way down, the shadows all the way up. Now you can see it flattened out the image, but it opened up a lot. There's a little more detail in the sky, and we have a lot more detail down here in the dark area. The next thing I do is the whites and the blacks. By the way, there's the histogram up here. All this, as you can see as I move the cursor across this, it shows up in the histogram what part of the histogram you're modifying. I'm going to talk more about the histogram in future videos, but right now, as I mentioned numerous times, we're just going to modify a photograph to see how it's done and how quick you could do it. Now this affects the whitest whites, as you can see, and the easy way to do this control is you hold the Alt key or Option key on your keyboard, and when you do that, you can see with the whites it'll turn completely black, your screen. You move the white to the right until you get some color forming up in here, and what that is that's showing you the parts now that are getting blown out. The purest white up there is totally blown out, no detail at all. As you go to the right, it gets more and more and more. So what you want to do is you want to adjust this control so you just start to see some spots, and then that's it. Now the blacks are opposite. You hold the Alt or Option key down, and when you do the blacks, the screen turns totally white. What you want to do is move it to the left until you get some black areas. Now I give a lot more leeway to the black, so I give a lot of I move it until the white screen shows a lot more black areas when compared to the white, which I showed just tiny spots. And now what that did, it added a little more depth to the picture. So we have these adjusted. The next thing I do is I like to add a little contrast. You could see you could bring it really contrasty, or you can make it really, really soft. Just a little. It's to taste, and what I do today might be different than what I do tomorrow. There's no real science to it. If my exposure was down too, you could turn up exposure. That's what I would do next. But typically on this photograph, I think it's okay. Clarity, most people think it's like sharpening. Technically, it's not really sharpening, although it kind of gives a little bit of an effect of sharpening. I usually bring that up. Depending on the photograph, I bring it up quite a bit. And this one, I think around 30 works good. Vibrance is affects the color, and it affects the non-saturated colors in the photograph, and it will make those a little more vibrant. Um, so what I'm saying is, like, if you had this orange up in here, or a color that was very saturated, it doesn't affect that color. It affects the ones that aren't as saturated. So we're going to add a little vibrance. As you see, you could bring it way up and bring it way down, make it black and white almost. So we're going to bring it up just a little bit. Saturation now just affects every single color in the photograph and makes it more saturated. We'll bring that up just a touch. Now that is really all my adjustments in the basic panel. That's what I do here. As I mentioned in a future video, we'll go in much greater detail on all these things. The next area in your adjustment panel is tone curve. And this is, you could get more contrast, dark, light, things like that. What we're going to do, though, we're not going to really do anything in this photograph with the tone curve. What we are going to do is in this panel here, this is the Use Saturation and Luminance panel. It's got little tabs here where you could adjust each color individually, or you could just turn your photograph into a black and white. And then when you adjust these, it's as though you had certain filters on your camera when you took it to take. In the old days with film, you would put a filter on your camera to when you use black and white film to bring out a certain shade, so you could take a certain type of picture. But we're not going to. This picture is not going to be black and white. So we go over here to the Use Saturation and Luminance layer. You could actually change the actual hue of red, whatever the colors here. Typically, I don't. I leave that alone. I go to saturation though, and in this photograph, as I recall, there was a bright orange streak going across in here. So I want more saturation of the orange. So I bring this up. There was yellows in there too. I bring that up. Now there was some blues up in here, so I want the blues higher. So you just kind of slide them around. This is all non-destructive in Lightroom, so you could go back and change things. You're not going to hurt anything. Next, luminance, I just need it to be more prominent, so I bring the orange down. See how it affects the orange sky? Bring it down to taste. Make it a little more yellow. And the blue, bring the blue down a little bit. And that's pretty much it for this in the Use Saturation and Luminance panel. Satisfied with that. The next thing you do is I go to the Detail panel, and you could sharpen your picture and offer some noise reduction. Typically, I'm going to actually have one video that's dedicated to this whole thing, because this is how important it is. But a good starting point, or a good way to just get you in the ballpark, if you're not so worried about it, get your sharpening around 70. Don't even mess with these other sliders, and bring your noise reduction around 40. That's just a quick, dirty way to get you in the ballpark. For now, we'll just leave it at that. And like I mentioned, we'll go in a lot more detail on that. We already did lens corrections. Effects I always do last. We'll go into that in a minute. Camera calibration. Here, typically all I do is in this slider here. Oh, one thing I want to mention. You see all these different things. We have camera landscape, neutral, Adobe standard. If you're shooting a JPEG, you won't have this. You won't have any choices, I believe. You'll just be stuck in whatever the camera made your JPEG into. That's why I encourage you to shoot in RAW. When you shoot in RAW, all these controls give you a lot more leeway, and you'll have all these different choices in here where you could modify the photograph. So just shoot in RAW, and you'll get a lot more ability to modify and adjust your photograph. Now in this under camera calibration, in the profile we could use a camera landscape profile, and you'll see the picture gets a little more intense. Camera neutral will bring it back a little bit. Camera portrait, if you're taking a portrait, this is supposedly more geared for a portrait. Camera standard, you can see pretty much where I had it to begin with. And camera vivid, everything's going to be a little more vivid. Now I don't like this as much. I think it made this a little too dark down here, and I didn't like any. The landscape was probably my next one that I liked, and that made everything also darker. So I'm just going to leave it where it was, Adobe Standard. Sometimes I switch it, sometimes I don't. It's really up to you. Next thing we do is I jump into effects, and I like to add a vignette to the photograph, very slight, to help draw the person looking at the photograph into the center of the picture. So this mount slider, if you slide it to the right, you'll get white. If you slide it to the left, you'll get black. And as I mentioned, I just want to do a very slight vignette, pretty much like that. And that actually is it. This is how quick you could go, because my idea is that I don't want to spend a lot of time post-processing my photographs. My main thing is I want to be out taking pictures. I don't want to be modifying them in Lightroom or any other program for that matter. So to give you an idea, this is the before photograph here, and here's the after photograph. You can see how we dramatically improved the photograph. There's actually more I would probably do on this, but I'm going to save it for the next video. And I'm going to show you some of these tools up here of what I do to further enhance the video. But as I mentioned numerous times, is in this video I just want to show you the real quick workflow of how I go through it and what you could do to bring this very flat, washed out video, or I'm sorry, photograph, make it into this. And that's it for now. I'm Anthony Morganti from AnthonyMorganti.com, and stop over to AnthonyMorganti.com. Every day I'll be adding another video about Lightroom and what you could do to improve your photographs. Thanks.